Okay, good afternoon, boys and girls. Today we're going to be looking at Ruby life pools. This is one of the shorter dungeons coming into Dragonflight, and definitely one of the more interesting ones in how it may end up playing out in M+. Basically, how it went down is there are two dungeons that were available for testing last weekend, Azure Vaults and Ruby life pools. Today I'm going to be covering Ruby life pools, talking about some of the things I liked and some of the things I didn't like, and some of the potential things that maybe Blizzard should be looking to change, or just kind of things that you should be looking forward to whenever you're running this dungeon. So let's talk about basically at its core, Ruby life pools. Like I said, a very short dungeon. It had a 30-minute timer, but this was in my opinion, a fairly generous 30-minute timer, kind of depending on like how you're going to be pulling this dungeon, especially later on into the dungeon. The first little area, there's not a ton going on. There's actually a decent amount of mobs that don't do like a bunch. Like all of these eggs that are onto the side here, they spawn whelps, and those whelps don't do anything. So you're just trying to make sure that you're able to pull all this trash through. Basically, there's not a ton going on here, just as a whole. And so this is mostly okay. I should not have lowered that. I should probably just lower this to not 2x speed. I think that this first section is fairly plain. There's not a lot going on here. This is like almost the embodiment of a whole W dungeon, which for what it is honestly fine. A whole W dungeon, just in the current state of the game, is totally acceptable, assuming that there's no count issues. And so let's talk about so one of the things that I really don't like about Ruby life pools just in general is the count that you're going to be getting in this dungeon. So basically, if you just hold W straight through this dungeon, you're going to end up at like 110% count, and it's very difficult to be able to avoid mobs to not pull it. So just look at these corridors. Basically, if you pull everything you have to pull everything that's around this ring, and whenever you pull it all, you have to pull most of it. So if you look on the minimap on the right-hand side, you see like these skulls, and you have to kill all of these mobs that are marked with these skulls to be able to activate the boss. And so there is some time that there are some mobs that you can skip, but realistically, it's very difficult to like skip anything, and it's not super clear how you skip some of these mobs. So this is my first criticism. That's my first criticism of Ruby life pools, just on the whole, is like the whole W route for this dungeon is something that I see as problematic, and it's something that maybe Blizzard should be looking at addressing, just how much count you're getting whenever you hold W in this dungeon. Or potentially they could even move positions of some of the packs, potentially like off to the side and whatnot, as opposed to standing in the middle of the corridor, to where you are able to just like potentially walk by them and skip some trash in some way. There is a way to skip some trash. So there are two mini bosses, and they're both these big dragons. And you see that we skip one of them here, but I body pulled it because I didn't realize that we were skipping it. So it's not very clear how you skip some of the trash. You see the dragon landing right here, and I accidentally end up body pulling it. It's not very clear, at least to common players, how you're going to be skipping some of this trash. And you see that, like, I see it land and it starts breathing on us, and I'm like, oh no, I accidentally body pulled it. So basically what you have to do is you have to run ahead and get away from this dragon. And if you are able to skip one and make sure that you have count for the remainder of the dungeon. That's not clear, though, to the average player, in my opinion. And so that's something that's like, whenever that's not clear, that's an issue. There are two mini bosses in this dungeon. I think right now, so Flame Gullet, he enrages at 50% HP, and he starts stacking up this buff where he does increasing damage just over time. I think that this is probably fine, just as a core mechanic of how Flame Gullet ends up working. Overall, I think that like maybe he would be a little bit overtuned, but this is more of a tuning thing as opposed to just a functionality of how he works. And you see right here, I'm even hovering over this Molten Blood. It's like a stacking debuff. You can even see it on his nameplate. And after he dips below 50% HP, he starts stacking up that Molten Blood. I think overall, not even the worst mechanic. I think it's a fairly interesting mechanic. He is probably fine to play with mobs above 50% HP, but then below 50% HP, you have to really be cautious and start maybe looking to play him solo. Now, this other mob, Thunderhead, obscenely annoying. So there's a lot wrong with this mob. First off, the Storm Breath telegraphs horribly. I think that the Storm Breath needs to change the telegraphing on it. I see that the mob is looking at me, and I don't know where the storm breath is going, right? And even as it's casting it, I don't know if I'm standing in it or not because the visuals on it are not telegraphing super well. In addition to that, this mob, he puts a debuff on 2 players. You see one is on me and the other one's on same monk. And so the strategy is to dispel one instantly and then let the other one naturally expire. And whenever you dispel them, it does like AoE wide damage. And you see same here dies, and then I'm dipping pretty low. But like just the mechanics on this mob, I think need to be changed. Overall, though, as we're progressing through this dungeon, I haven't had too many other complaints outside of this dragon and then some of the count issues. In addition to that, if you accidentally body pull, I didn't exactly show them, but hold on. You see these mobs that are casting Storm Infusion off to the side? Basically, these mobs are a never pull situation, and if you accidentally body pull them with anything, you were in a heap of trouble, and you were going to like 200% enemy forces count. You see, we actually wiped this dragon because of how tough it is. It's just... Part of it's overtuned, part of it's that it doesn't telegraph well. I suspect that it's going to get nerfed. I think that the telegraphing on the mechanics need to be better. And honestly, I think that the way that the debuff, having to, okay, so you insta-dispel one, you let the other one expire, and then it does AoE damage. I just feel like how mechanically how that works is probably not the best. I think that there are some ways that you should be looking at how that mechanic just works fundamentally. Beyond that, I mean, we're dealing with Thundering. I think the trash, by and large, in here is mostly okay. No, not too many complaints. Now we get to Kokia Blazehoof. So I didn't talk about the first boss. I actually think the first boss is fairly decent. Kokia Blazehoof, I also think that this boss is okay. It's actually... I think it's overall fairly interesting. So basically the core mechanics of her is she drops this boulder that you see... and it just like shoots out, and then she also summons an ad. And so you see the molten boulder is coming out, it's dropping this flame puddle, and then whenever we kill this ad, it's also going to drop this fire patch. And so you have to kite Miss Blazehoof around the arena. The fire ticks relatively quickly, so it's actually, I think it ticks instantly, and so you need to make sure that you are pre-moving the boss, or you're making sure that you're not going to be standing in it at all. The only complaint that I have about this fight is the molten boulder mechanic. I think it doesn't telegraph that well. And what I mean when I say that is like, there's a ground effect. You can see that she's casting the ability and she's facing towards where it is. But there are situations where if you are standing at ranged and you don't see the ground effect and you're not explicitly watching that she's casting Molten Boulder, it's actually very difficult to tell that she's casting it. More often than not, I feel like for abilities like this, they have some form of like frontal, like the infiltrators from this season of Shrouded, they have some form of frontal telegraph that they are shooting a boulder in that way. And if you have the boulder baited behind you or you just don't see it with your camera, it's kind of difficult to tell that the boulder is being cast. We're doing a good job of making sure that we're stacked up in a melee here, but I did a run previously where the boulder was actually very difficult to see. And so that's just my thoughts on it. Like I think the telegraphing on that mechanic is also something that maybe should be looked at a little bit. So the channelers here, I think, are overtuned. I think just overall they're overtuned, but I think that this is something that it can be addressed. I believe that overall the channelers doing this amount, like being deadly, is something that is nice. I think that mechanically healers should have pretty hefty checks in dungeons, and the channelers being that is something that I think is more positive than negative generally. And so I don't have any complaints about the channelers. I think that they're a little bit overtuned right now, but that's almost a completely different issue. Just the amount of damage the Lightning Storm is doing, say it comes down a little bit on the amount of damage, this is more or less fine. And so then let's talk about the last boss. I think the last boss is probably this and the count, I think, are the things that need to be addressed the most. So how this final boss works is you see there's a dragon, and then there's the dragon rider. They don't share HP. And so the dragon is active at all times while the rider is also active. And so this promotes, right as it currently stands, basically the rider mounts the dragon whenever the rider himself gets to 40% HP. And so the meta strategy for how you're going to be doing this boss is you want to run as many ranges as possible, and they are primarily focusing down the dragon, because the dragon during the mounted phase is actually really, really annoying. And if you don't deal with him adequately, then that's going to cause problems. And so you're going to want to be focusing the dragon even while this rider is active. I think that that by itself mechanically needs to be addressed, because stopping damage, either stopping damage on the rider or just full focusing the dragon with a bunch of ranged is a problem in and of itself. And so I think that has to be taken into account. Like, what are you going to do with multiple melee groups? Because what you can do is you can absolutely just focus down the rider, make him mount the dragon, and then you're dealing with the fight, I would say, as normal. But as it currently stands, there's basically no incentive to hit the rider, and you would rather full focus on the dragon. And so I think that needs to be changed, just fundamentally how the boss works. I think this could be addressed by having either the dragon take reduced damage while he's in the air, or alternatively, he takes bonus damage whenever he dismounts. And then, so that way you're looking to push the rider to 40% HP, and then you focus down the dragon. Right now, as it currently stands, this fight is very punishing for melee. Obviously, there's like a fucking cast lock. You see me getting locked a bunch of times, but I think overall this fight is very punishing for melee, and something that maybe needs to be looked at is like, how do you make this fight a little bit more lenient for melee? Overall, though, I'm pretty positive on Ruby life pools. There are a couple things. I mean, this is very early into beta. This is not something to be worried about overall. This is very early into a beta. I think that Ruby life pools is a nice dungeon. I'm excited to see how it turns out, and I'm excited to test it again whenever it comes back around for testing. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I will see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.